bedrock things about being a wise person is obeying God. That's part of the nature and makeup of godly wisdom. But what happens when it's not that clear about how to hold two commands together at the same time? So let me give you an example. In Isaiah 41:10, it says, fear not, right? Pretty clear. But then in Ecclesiastes 12:13, it says, fear God. So good luck with that. Let's pray. We'll just get back to me when you resolve that, right? No, let's make it, one of my spiritual gifts is making things worse before I make them better. So let's keep making it worse. Look at Exodus 14:13. Don't be afraid, stand firm. What does Psalm 114 says? Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Lord. So which is it? Stand firm or tremble, okay? Now, you might say, Adam, this is just like you're taking passages completely removed from one another, taking them out of context. Of course, you can create a contrast. And when you'd said that, I'd say, well done, young Padawans. But what if I showed you that there can be not just the same passage, but in the very same sentence that you have these two ideas? Is it to fear God or is it not to fear God? To which you might say, well, then prove it, Adam. To which I'd say, fine, I will. Okay? Exodus 20. Now, when all the people saw the thunder and flashes of lightning and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled. And they stood far off and said to Moses, you speak to us and we'll listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die. How does Moses just resolve this, tension in the room? He says this. He says, do not fear, for God has come to test you, so that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. So Moses resolved the tension by saying, don't fear, but fear. Again, it's been a great sermon. Get back to you, when you resolve that. So what we are learning this morning is that there is a kind of fear that the Bible condemns, and there is a kind of fear that the Bible commends. People will often talk about it the same thing. I'm going to fear God. But what we are going to look at today is that there is a kind of fear that is sinful and a kind of fear that is right and good. As I was preparing for this big concept called the fear of the Lord, it's the central idea we'll talk about today. I am so indebted to this wonderful book called Rejoice and Tremble. Somebody in our church actually gifted me. And it's by a guy named Michael Reeves. And he said, it's a book-length treatment of this tension. Is it not to fear or is it to fear? And if we are to fear God, what is that fear supposed to look like? And over the way to get to the heart of understanding the difference between those two kinds of what is a good fear and what is a sinful fear is understanding this concept, the fear of the Lord. It is certainly mentioned many times in Proverbs, but it's mentioned all throughout the Scriptures. And in fact, in Proverbs, it says that if you really want to be wise, you have to understand what the fear of the Lord looks like and how to practice it in your life. Because Proverbs says it's at the heart. In 1:7 it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. In 9:10 it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. So this is a really important thing you and I want to understand this morning. And we're going to look at the fear of the Lord, and we're going to look at it in just three different ways. We're going to look at what it is not, what it is, and what it does. And for all of those three, there'll kind of be three little subpoints. There'll be three things that we're going to look at it's not, three things that it is, and three things that it does in your life. So let's get after it. Let's look at what the fear of the Lord is not. Now again, what I just said to kind of set this up is they look at these contrasting commands, fear not and fear God, and say, well, there's got to be some sort of sinful fear that is bad, that we are not supposed to have, and there's some sort of good fear of the Lord that we are supposed to have. And one of the best ways to understand what something is first by looking at what it's not. So here's first thing. The fear of the Lord is not being afraid of God and fleeing from God. Now, let me tell you why I know this. Some people think that, when you see God for He is, He's big and powerful, that it's just like fear-inducing. It's literally like you kind of cower and maybe back up. But it's not quite what God has in mind when He endorses that you and I are to have a fear of the Lord. I'll tell you where I think I see this is in Genesis 3. Adam and Eve at one point were just walking, right alongside God. They saw Him. They knew exactly who created the heavens and the earth. It was God. They knew that. This big, powerful God, and yet Adam and Eve walked and talked and worked with God in the garden until one thing happened, right? They had a fear of the Lord that sent them running. And what did it all stem from? It stemmed from their sin. Satan, the deceiver, was kind of lurking in the corners, and he started whispering lies about the character of God. He called everything God said into question. Do you remember his words? He would say, "Did God really say?" And he would contradict the Lord, and he would compromise the Lord's character. And he would say, God is just this withholding guy who has all sorts of good stuff he doesn't want you to have. And Adam and Eve took the bait, ate the apple, and sent running from the Lord. They immediately left. They tried to cover up. They wanted to get distance. And we know that's not what God wanted, because what did he do? He tracks them down. Every time that there was that distance, that bad fear from God, he rushes in and tries to close the gap. Because when you think about it, what Adam and Eve were doing was exactly what Satan, the deceiver, wanted them to. See, in the book of James, it says that even demons fear God, they believe in him, and they shudder. When you have an when you have an incomplete or partial view of God, when you just see that wrathful side that someone like Satan or the demons would see, you run. You run far away. You are afraid and you flee from God. And isn't that exactly what the enemy of God would want from you and I? Is to convince us that to really approach God well is to fear him and run in the other direction. But that's not what the fear of the Lord is. Second, the fear of the Lord is not a legalistic avoidance of God. Now let me tell you what I mean by that. If you've been with us in the Gospel of Matthew, you've seen these people, the Pharisees. They were really, really good law followers. So good that somehow all of that following the rules distanced them from God. We've seen that, haven't we? Where they are all about following the rigors of the commands, but somehow they're missing this closeness and intimacy with God. And this is not a call to just sin willy-nilly. This is a call to always approach God in relationship. There's this kind of throwaway line in a book that I love where the main character is wrestling with some tensions, and she says that the best way to avoid Jesus is to avoid sin. You've seen this, haven't you? Where people go like, whoa, 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 like Jesus dying on the cross for my sin, that sounds like a little too much. Like, I'm a pretty good person. I'm not sure I need that. Have you ever heard that? Where I'm good enough, I don't need the sacrifice of Jesus. It's a way of avoiding the reality of sin so that you avoid needing that from Jesus. It's that feeling that I'm good enough. But fear of the Lord is not just obeying so much that you steer clear of God. And third, the fear of the Lord is not some superstition or coping mechanism. I don't know if you've ever heard the name Bertrand Russell, but I got to ironically read one of his books in seminary entitled Why I Am Not a Christian, right? Sometimes learning what a thing is learning about what it's not. And he wrote this book, Why I'm Not a Christian, and he said that fear is bad and religion is to blame. He said it's this classic, religion creates this fear that, surprise, surprise, only religion can solve. And so he says that religion is just this superstition. It's a thing that we need to grow out of. Well, listen to his words. He says, religion is based upon fear. It is partly a terror of the unknown, and partly, as I have said, the wish to feel that you have a kind of elder brother who will stand by you in all your troubles and disputes. Fear is the basis of the whole thing. Fear of the mysterious, fear of defeat, fear of death. He goes on. He says, in this world, we can now begin a little to understand things and a little to master them by the help of science, which has forced its way step by step against the Christian religion, against churches, and against the opposition of all the old precepts. You can hear him. He's driving out that superstition. And he ends with these words. He says, science can help us get over the craven fear in which mankind has lived for so many generations. Science can teach us, and I think our own hearts can teach us, no longer to look round for imaginary supports, no longer to invent allies in the sky, but rather to look to our own efforts here below to make this world a fit place to live in, instead of the sort of place that churches in all these centuries have made it. Bertrand Russell, if you want to sum that up, says if you want less fear, you need less God. And maybe add in some science. And that'll fix it. But to which I just humbly ask, has it fixed it? As science has been on the rise, and science is great. I'm all for it, right? I want to high five science. But it doesn't solve all of your problems, does it? When you have this robust understanding of the world, it doesn't assuage all of your fears. It's exactly what Bertrand Russell thought would happen, and it hasn't. And by the way, he is opposite of the teaching of Jesus. He says, hey, if you want less fear, you need less God and more science. Jesus humbly says the opposite. You might remember the scene, Matthew 8:26. They're on the boat. All of the disciples there. Jesus is sound asleep in the bottom of the boat, and the storms come, and the disciples are freaking out. They get afraid. They are afraid, and they would have thought the weather was completely the responsibility of God. They were terrified. And so they get Jesus to come up, and they want help. They want a relief from their fear. And Jesus comes up, and what does he not say? Why are you afraid? Oh, you have insufficient meteorological understanding. He doesn't say that, just in case you didn't know, right? That was a joke. I'll scratch that for the 1 o'clock service. No, Jesus says, why are you afraid? Oh, you have little faith. He says that the more faith you have, the less fear of the world around you will have. Bertrand Russell said the opposite thing. He says, no, don't. You need less God to have less fear. See, the fear of the Lord is not just being afraid and running away from God. It's not this avoiding so much sin that you can avoid God, just trying to be good enough. And it's not some superstition. So if it's not those things, what is it? So many people have taken stabs at definitions of the fear of the Lord. One that has stuck in my mind for years, and I think it's from the 1700s, it's called awe and reverence. So the fear of the Lord is like awe and reverence. I love that. It's short, it's memorable, and that one has stuck with me. But I have come to find it incomplete. It doesn't round out, I think, all of what God has for you and for me in the fear of the Lord. I read one definition from a guy named Tim Keller. He's a pastor, passed away a few years ago, but I really love and admire his teaching. And he said, his definition is a little long, but he said, the fear of the Lord is a life-rearranging, joyful awe and wonder before the greatness of God, of who God is and what God's done. It's pretty good, right? That's great. But there was one definition. This just takes my breath away. This is it, right? I want to make T-shirts of this. I want bumper stickers, maybe a hat, although hats make me look really young, so I don't know if I'm going to do that. This is the definition that just really captured me. It says, the fear of the Lord is a right-sizing view of God, rooted in awe and love of who God is and what he's done that transforms you. I mean, I had to search. That's kind of breathtaking, is it? And I tell you what, the reason I think I like it so much, it was written by a theologian I really admire. So, I couldn't have said it better myself, because that's exactly how I said it. Anyways, but here's what I like about it. This is the missing element, I think, in so many people's understanding of the fear of the Lord. It's the missing element of love. That love and fear of the Lord are actually so intertwined, and we'll see that in a second, that they go hand in glove. But so often, we fall prey to the fear of the Lord that is somehow just kind of cowering and taking steps back from him. But in love, you approach something you love. So God is still the same high, holy, lofty, lifted up God, but we know time and time again that he was so interested in being with us, he took on flesh and dwelt among us. And so I think any definition, any understanding of the fear of the Lord that you have or I have has to include both that kind of awe and reverence dimension and that close, proximate love that God wants to foster between us. Okay, so let's look at it. Let's flesh this out. What is it? So first, we need to know that God gives us the fear of the Lord. This is a gift from him. Like any good thing in life, it is a gift from God. Literally in the book of Jeremiah, God says that I will put the fear of the Lord in my people. If you have any awe of God, if you have any love for God, it all started with him. He is putting that fear of the Lord in you. The second thing is, quite opposite to Genesis 3, the fear of the Lord attracts us to God. If you have the fear of the Lord, you are well aware of how high and holy God is. But you are drawn to him. You want to get close. And it's because the fear of the Lord is linked with God's goodness time and time again. in that same section of Jeremiah, it says that God's loving and good actions are what produce the fear of the Lord in people. In the book of Hosea, it says that people will come to the Lord in fear of the Lord because of his goodness. In one place, God is literally referred to as a title, the fear of Isaac. And it's not plain, like, what does that mean about, like, attractive? If you hear, like, that's the fear of Isaac, you would imagine maybe that Isaac is backpedaling. But let's look, what did God do to Isaac to deserve being called the fear of Isaac? Well, just look at how God interacted with Isaac. When Isaac was, even before he was born, his father Abraham was promised that Isaac would receive all of the blessings of the covenant Abraham had. God rescued Isaac instead of allowing Abraham to sacrifice him. God gave Isaac and his barren wife Rebekah twin boys, and God gave Isaac land and a harvest. What did God do to deserve to be called the fear of Isaac? He blessed him, and he blessed him, and he blessed him. And because of that, it produced this fear. So again, don't think that love or attraction is somewhere all distant from the fear of the Lord. God's goodness produces not just awe, but love for God. And lastly, the fear of the Lord expresses our love for God. It's how we love. When we have that sense of awe and love for God, we are transformed people. Again, our goal, to live and love like Jesus. That's not natural. It takes God shaping us. And when you have this fear of the Lord, awe and love for him, you begin to change. Time and time throughout the Bible, those things are so close to each other. In one of the oldest Jewish prayers, the Shema in the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about obeying God so that we may fear him. And then in the next verse, it calls us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Every time you see fearing God, it mentions loving God. Actually, one of the most incredible places is in Deuteronomy 10. Just listen to this. It's Moses speaking to the people of Israel, and he says, "What does the Lord your God ask of you? But to fear the Lord your God." Right? So that's the heading. To fear the Lord your God. And listen to the ingredients. To fear the Lord your God, to walk in obedience, to love him, and to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Is that just like, does that shape what the fear of the Lord is supposed to be? Yes, it has this element of obedience and just respect that God's word ought to be followed. But it is this love for him. So much love that you just want to serve him. So the fear of the Lord is that right-sizing view of God, rooted in awe and love for who God is and what he's done. And all of that, when you get woven into that, transforms you. And so lastly, let's look at what it does. Now, the three things I see, and again, they should sound very familiar, kind of fits with our mission statement, that the fear of the Lord helps you know God, grow up in God, and go out for the gospel of God. So let's just look at those, and we'll look at some proverbs that help illustrate that. The first is that the fear of the Lord helps you know God. Now again, I've already mentioned this, but Proverbs puts the fear of the Lord at the center of the life of faith. This is what it says in chapter 1, verse 7. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." It says that sense of awe, that sense of love for God, for who he is and what he's done that transforms you, that's how you really know something in this life. And he contrasts it. He says the fool despises wisdom and instruction. What's amazing is it says that there's two paths, right? There's a path of wisdom and there's a path of folly. And he says, if you follow the path of wisdom, you will just grow in the fear of the Lord. If you don't, not only will you not have the fear of the Lord, you'll be on the wrong path. And that word instruction literally means discipline or correction. Out of love, God often, doesn't he, point us back in the right direction. You take one step this way, and he wants to allow you to course correct. But a fool hates that, ignores that. And in the fear of the Lord, you listen to everything God says. So the fear of the Lord, as it says here, it's like the building blocks. It's like what the alphabet is to reading. It's like what the notes on a keyboard are to playing music. It's like what counting to 10 is for doing math. You need that basic building block. And it flies in the face of, I think, some of our natural instincts. Have you ever heard this expression? Well, you got to live and learn, right? Have you ever heard that? Proverbs says it's opposite. You need to learn and then live. You need to learn the ways of God. You need to learn His character and His goodness and His love for you. And only then can you truly live. And the way to do that, the building block, is to have this fear of the Lord, this awe of who He is, and this love for who He is. See, and if you do that, you actually begin to know God in deeper ways. Listen to what it says in Proverbs 14. It says, whoever fears the Lord, what? Has a secure fortress. And for their children it will be a refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, turning a person from the snares of death. Do you see what he's saying is, as you fear the Lord, you will begin to know Him as a secure fortress. And not only that, your children will know that. What I love about this verse is it takes our eyes off ourselves for a second and puts them on the next generation. It puts them on people around us. A life committed to fearing God will impact people around you. And as you experience and grow in the fear of the Lord, you will experience God as a fortress and as a fountain of life. You will know Him in deeper and wider dimensions than you ever could if you don't approach Him with awe and love. Second, the fear of the Lord helps you grow up in God. There's this little section in Proverbs 3 that I think shows you what it looks like to be someone growing up in God, and the fear of the Lord is the centerpiece. It starts in verse 5 of chapter 3. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. If you want one word, one concept, one thing to put at the center of what it is to be a person of faith, it's trust. And trust, it's not that complicated. Trust is relying on God in the presence of circumstances that you don't understand, you don't like, and you probably would choose something different. And it's sticking with God's way even when your understanding has all sorts of other alternative paths. And the key to wisdom, the key to fearing God, is to trust in the Lord with all your heart, everything, thoughts, feelings, actions, not lean on your understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. That word acknowledge, you know what word it actually is? This kind of blew my mind. It's this word yada. It means to know. It comes up that talking about this deep, intimate knowing, experiential knowing of God. It's saying in all of your ways, know God, and He will begin to make your paths straight and shape you. How is He going to shape you? Look at verses 7 and 8. It says, be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord, and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. As you fear the Lord, as you trust in Him in all your ways, as you lean on His understanding, not your own, you will begin to turn away from evil, and you will begin to experience healing and refreshment in your very self. Maybe a way to remember this is that what you yield can be healed. And what God says is that if you put the fear of the Lord at the center, you will grow. You will become a person of increasing trust in God. You will be a person of increasing witness for God to the world. And you will be the kind of person that is not wise in your own ways, but is wise in the ways of God. So this fear of the Lord, it's going to help us know God. It's going to help us grow in God. And lastly, the fear of the Lord helps you go out for the gospel of God. You know, it's so, when we talk about the gospel, it's so easy to think of it as just like a New Testament phenomenon. Like you got to wait till Jesus to really know the gospel. But this redemptive work of God, I mean, it starts in the Old Testament. And one of the most fun things I think as a pastor and to share with a congregation is to point out where you see the gospel in these surprising places. The book of Proverbs is replete with gospel. See, part of the gospel understanding is this narrative about human sin, isn't it? It's this, we fall woefully short from God. And they knew that when the Proverbs were written. The Proverbs were written at kind of the peak of the sacrificial system. You might remember what that's like, right? You have sin in your life. It causes this debt between you and God, and it needs paid for. And do you remember how they paid for it? They took real live animals and took them to the temple and sacrificed them to pay for a real debt they knew existed between them and God. But it was a system that had to be repeated time and time again. Every year, every periodic time that they would mark, they needed to sacrifice more animals to clean the slate, but the slate got dirty again, didn't it? And so they had to offer more sacrifices and more, and it was never, ever enough. So much so that this gospel wisdom of being a sinful person is even in the book of Proverbs. They didn't need Jesus to tell them yet. They needed Jesus for the solution, but they knew where they stood. Listen to what it says in Proverbs 20. It says, "Who can say, I've made my heart pure. I am clean from sin." Right? This is called a rhetorical question. It's nobody, right? Nobody can say that. No one can say, I have made my heart pure. No one can say, I am clean from sin. Doesn't that sound like the gospel message, the message about sin? That you're woefully separated from God because of sin. But they longed for a solution. Wisdom not only knows that, but knows there's got to be a way through. I know God is awesome and I have offered him, but I know God is loving. There's got to be a way through. And it's disclosed in Proverbs 16. Listen to what it says. It says, through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, evil is avoided. Now, if you read that love and faithfulness, they sound like maybe two of the same things. If you hack into them, they're not. Love means this like steadfast, loving, merciful way of being towards somebody. That one's pretty clear. But you know what faithfulness, if you looked it up, blew my mind. If you look it up, faithfulness actually means this rigid commitment to righteousness and truth. So do you know what we have here? We have a God who is so faithful, who's so committed to truth and righteousness that he can't stand for sin. And that leaves us in quite a predicament, doesn't it? But we have a God that is so good that he is loving and merciful and steadfast in that love. He's stuck to us. He wants to see his commitment through in saving us. That is the only... Can you believe the gospel is in Proverbs? That it's only through that love and mercy of God and his commitment to truth and righteousness that sin is atoned for. But at that time, it hadn't been atoned for completely yet. Wouldn't it be beautiful if one day those two things could come together? In fact, it was so written into the longings of the people of God. Listen to what it says in Psalm 85. Surely his salvation is near those who fear him, that his glory may dwell in our land. Love and faithfulness meet together. Righteousness and peace kiss each other. This is kind of wishful thinking, this longing, this hope that maybe one day somebody who is so against sin could stand up for it and pay the penalty on our behalf. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, do you know when it happened? 2,000 years ago, when God allowed his righteous Son, the one who is so committed to righteousness that he never sinned himself, but was so loving, God allowed that Son, out of love and mercy, to pay the penalty for sins he never committed. That is the cornerstone of what, when you figure that out, when God touches your heart with that, knowing that it's a commitment to truth and righteousness and this deep love that atones for sins, you will be changed. You will have fear of the Lord. You will be in awe of him. You will love him, and you will be changed. So let's commit ourselves as we end in prayer. Let's commit ourselves to growing in the fear of the Lord, holding him in awesome wonder, and loving him so much, receiving everything that he has for us, so that we become people who live and love like his Son. Amen?